Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our Behavioural Decision Making courses webinar. So my name is Lucy Welch. I'm a Student Enquiries Advisor, so you may recognise my name if we've spoken over the phone or via email before. So just to give you a bit more information about the structure of this webinar, as attendees, your microphones and videos have been disabled, so you'll just need to interact with us via the chat and Q&A sections. So whilst we do welcome questions throughout the presentation, we do think that to get most out of the presentation, you wait until the end and ask your questions via the Q&A section, which will be on the right-hand side of your screen. And if you see a question that's in the Q&A section that's particularly relevant to you, or you'd like to be answered more imminently, then you can upvote that question and that will jump to the top of the queue to be answered. So with that said, we will also be monitoring the chat section throughout. We will also be sending a recording of this webinar around in a few days' time, so do refer back to that if you would like to catch up on anything that you might have missed. So with that said, I'll pass over to Dr. Comerford to start with the presentation.
Very much. Hello, everyone. So I'm the Programme Director of the MSc in Behavioural Science for Management and have been in that role for a year now. And I'm also the Programme Director for the new MSc in Behavioural Decision Making for Finance. Because I'm going to be talking about two programmes today, I'll start talking about the Behavioural Science for Management programme and go into some detail on the modules that we offer on that and the dissertation. And then I'll go on to talk about the Behavioural Decision Making for Finance programme. But before that, I'll just give a very brief overview to the University of Stirling. You can see a nice picture of it there with our loch down the hill and the Wallace Monument up behind it. We're based in the centre of Scotland, Stirling Castle, you'll see in the bottom right there. So Stirling is a beautiful old city and a great place to live. The university itself is quite small by university standards, but it's a very inclusive community, and that's reflected in our student satisfaction scores. So you'll see here that overall satisfaction is very, very high for Stirling, and students particularly like the one-on-one experience that they have with teachers, the feedback that they get, and also we have excellent sports facilities here. So I guess the key point to take from this is that Stirling is a great place to live and the university is a great place to be a student. And there are some nice pictures to demonstrate that. It looks just like this today. Living in Stirling is safe and you can read yourself. Again, nice place to be. And I'm not going to dwell on these living costs, but it's good to know that when you see these slides later on, you'll be able to work out a ballpark figure of how much it's going to cost for your student experience here at Stirling. The library and information support that we have in the programme is very thorough and rigorous. So all of the textbooks that we set as core readings for the course will be available online. And so that will reduce your costs as a student and also make things easy to access. Now I'm going to go on to talk about the specifics of the programme. So let me first talk about the Behavioural Science for Management programme. And you'll come in semester one, there'll be a general induction for all students of the management school, which is called Flying Start. The first week of that you'll spend with all graduate students. And then the second week, we'll start to split out the behavioural science students. We'll give you a grounding in the materials that you'll be using over the course of the rest of the semester. So we'll give you some basic introduction to statistics during that course, because I know statistics is something that every year I've taught in this program, which is getting on for 8 at this point, students come into it concerned about, do I need to know maths? And the question is, we'll build up those skills. So you'll see the third module that's listed there is understanding and using statistics. And that's taught by Dr. Seda Erdem, who's an excellent researcher and also an excellent communicator of statistics. And as the title of that module suggests, this is about giving you an intuition of how to read statistics, how to understand when you see a piece of results written up in a paper, what is that telling you? Can we be confident in the results that show up there? And then you'll work through some projects in order to get yourself in a position to apply those statistical techniques yourself. And again, the goal is that you have an intuition, that you can communicate clearly as to whether we can be confident in the results that we find in our studies. So I hope that assuages you and appeases you that the statistics that's required for this, you don't need any background in statistics for the program. That will be given to you. And we're not looking for you to be crunching numbers. We're looking for you to develop an evidence base. And that idea of developing an evidence base for decision making carries throughout the course. So the Behavioural Economics 1 Theories and Concept module that you see listed at the top there of semester 1, that's going to take you through the idea of what a rational decision looks like. And from there, we'll look at deviations from rationality with the goal of explaining and predicting people's behavior. The logic is that if you can predict people's behavior, then you can influence that behavior, you can guide people towards choosing in line with what's going to give them most satisfaction, you can guide them towards achieving policy outcomes that are desirable, you can guide them towards purchasing products that you think are of value to them. So that's a broad survey of how people make decisions, what are the motivations that they have in decision making, what are the psychological biases that distort decision making. And as the title suggests, that module is looking at theories and experiments that show these deviations from the theories. In the second semester, you move on from seeing these theories to applying them in practice. So you'll see in the second semester listed there, Behavioural Economics 2, Finance, Business and Policy Applications. In that second semester, we're going to be using the same theories that you've encountered in semester 1 to see how can we leverage these ideas that we've encountered in order to add value to people, in order to guide their behavior towards what's in their own best interest, in order to predict deviations from what efficient markets would be expected to do in the finance sector and leverage that to either make money or to help consumers avoid wasteful decisions. Going back up to semester 1 now, the Psychology of Work module you see listed there is delivered by a recent PhD in the very, very new field of human resource management and behavioral economics. So taking the sort of theories and concepts that you'll encounter in Behavioural Economics 1 and applying it specifically to the workplace. So what Craig is going to cover in that is a broad understanding of the world of work through the prism of psychological insights and economic rationality. So specific topics that he'll look at are satisfaction at work, how to measure it, but also what predicts it. What are the things that you as a manager would be able to do to increase your workers' satisfaction, increase employee retention, increase productivity? And then also, what are the sort of mistakes that a manager might make in terms of recruitment? So things like discrimination, unconscious bias, how those biases might be overcome. And in terms of remuneration. So if you want to incentivize workers and motivate them, what are the most effective ways of doing that? So again, that Psychology of Work module is going to be very evidence-based. It's going to be looking at how to get the best out of workers and how to give them the best working experience in return. Going down to semester 2, I've already spoken briefly about the Behavioural Economics 2 module. So as I say, that's going to be applying the toolkit that we've acquired in semester 1 to make real-world changes to the choice environment that people face in order to create value. The second module you see listed there for semester 2 is called Evidence-Based Decision Making. And this is a course in experimental methods. And we're going to look at experimental methods specifically as applied to theories of decision making. So we're going to dig into those theories and concepts that you came across in semester 1 to understand how exactly did the researchers who uncovered these theories go about proving that they're valid theories. How would you test a theory in practice? So this module feeds directly into your dissertation preparation. This is how do you go about primary research in order to develop an evidence base to support your theory of how people will behave, or your business strategy, or your public policy? How do you justify your decisions with data? So that first half of the module will teach you how to conduct an experiment, how to read an experiment, how to analyze an experiment. So there will be a little bit of applied statistics in this module. And also questionable research practices that you should be aware of in order not to bias yourself into accepting a false positive. So you may be aware that there's a sort of crisis in social psychology at the moment around replication, that there's these published studies which, when people attempted to replicate them, they found that they just weren't true. The results weren't replicating. And what's been uncovered is that when researchers were analyzing their data sets, they were making ad hoc decisions that shifted the balance in favor of finding a spurious result. And so one of the things that you're going to learn on this evidence-based decision-making course is how to avoid biasing yourself into accepting an untrue proposition as being true. In the second half of that module, you'll get further training in statistical analysis from our economics division here. So we're very lucky to have really skilled microeconomists who are working at the cutting edge of what's called natural experiments. So a natural experiment is one that occurs in the wider world. For example, right now we're living through a natural experiment in the form of a World Cup, where it's been shown in the stock market that if your home team wins in the World Cup, this has a positive effect on stock market performance. And we know this because World Cups are infrequent events, and the result of a World Cup match often has this random character to it. And so from that randomness, we can infer what's the causal effect on stock market performance of, for example, an unexpected World Cup victory. And you're going to learn how to look at secondary data, administrative data, survey data, and from that data, in which no researcher went around manipulating anything, you can still infer causal estimates of relationships by a clever use of natural experiments of the type I've just described. So Mirko, who's going to be teaching those microeconometric techniques, does a great job of intuitively bringing you through how exactly can you back out a causal estimate of a relationship from a secondary data set. And then the last of the modules you'll encounter in semester 2 is survey measurement and analysis, which is taught by Simon McCabe, an excellent psychologist here in the Management Work and Organisation division. And Simon is an expert on how to go about constructing survey instruments so as to get at the measures that you want to understand and to measure those concepts that are most meaningful to you as a researcher. And again, what biases you need to be aware of when you're conducting that sort of research, and statistical techniques in order to make sense of the data when you receive it. So measurement is vital to coming up with any sort of meaningful conclusions. Simon is going to take you through how to extract the most meaning from the measurement that you use. In summary then, the thought element of the program is going to give you a toolkit to make you a powerful independent researcher. And our logic in giving you this toolkit is that when you go into a job interview, regardless what domain it's in the private sector, in the charity sector, in government, if you are able to make a case that there's causal evidence that your suggested strategy will have a beneficial effect on some outcome that your employer is interested in, that makes you an invaluable asset to that firm. because it means you're a safe pair of hands. You're somebody who is not just going with your gut idea of what works, but you can actually demonstrate that what you believe works has worked. And that's the most cost-effective way of making any sort of policy decision. Trial and error, but very assiduous trial and error, very tailored in order to extract as most meaning from it as possible. And it will also give you a toolkit to design the most cost-effective strategy to getting to the outcome that's desired by your employer. So keep that in mind throughout the module, throughout the program, that it may seem at times as though the sort of theories that you're encountering are quite arcane and esoteric, and the experiments that you'll see demonstrating those theories are often quite contrived and don't seem to have many real-world applications. But always keep in the back of your mind that step backwards to what's the big picture here? What are we trying to extract from this? And what we're trying to extract from it is, how can we add value to the organization we're working for? How can we enhance the value that's experienced by our consumers or our stakeholders or our citizens? And the next part of the program is the dissertation, in which you will apply your own idea of what creates value in the world. So we really have two models for these dissertations in the Behavioural Science for Management program. One is to apply an existing theory to some real-world context that you care about. And we have some really great examples of this from past students. So one of them that is going on right now, we have a student on the program who works with the Midlothian NHS, and she works with neonatal care, so mothers of young children, and particularly around the topic of nutrition. And one of the things that she's discovered is that there are UN targets around getting people to begin breastfeeding, but there's no targets around making sure they continue to breastfeed. And we know from a wealth of literature that continuing to breastfeed is a very powerful predictor of later life outcomes for the child who's benefited from that breastfeeding. So literacy improves, early school readiness improves, and these students or these children generally go on to have better health in later life. So how can we go about facilitating and encouraging parents to continue with breastfeeding? And Tracy's intervention, which is unproven at this point, she's collecting data on it, is to use what's called implementation intentions. So she's going around as we speak to antenatal classes where pregnant women are learning about how to be new parents, and she's giving a little prompt card. And her experimental manipulation is that for some of these parents, on the other side of the prompt card is going to be a question: I intend to persist with breastfeeding for blank weeks. And the idea here is that simply by having a parent prompt themselves with this question and come up with what's the minimum amount of time that they intend to stick with and persist with breastfeeding, this will form an intention that they'll be more likely to stick with. And so she'll follow up with those parents after 2 weeks and see, has the child been breastfed? And the expectation is, or at least the hypothesis is, that parents who've received that intervention will be more likely to breastfeed for longer than those who don't receive the intervention. So there Tracy's applying an intervention that's been demonstrated in other domains to get people to save for retirement or to get them to attend flu vaccination appointments. She's applying it to this new domain that's of great policy importance. So that's one model for the dissertation. A second model is to come up with some new theory. So whereas the work that Tracy's doing is very applied, it's out in the field, it's trying to impact some real world outcome, in this case breastfeeding, what Owen is going to be doing in his dissertation is trying to disentangle an ambiguity in the literature. So empathy, which is feeling what other people are feeling, and compassion, which is being aware that other people are feeling that thing and understanding that that's the case, but not necessarily feeling it yourself. Those two concepts are very bound up and very linked to one another. And so there's an ambiguity in the literature as to which of those is driving the effects that have been discovered of these things. So Owen is going to split those apart and see, is it compassion or is it empathy that's driving the results that are observed? One thing that it's worth thinking about even at this stage is, if you're interested in a specific outcome, like Tracy was interested in breastfeeding, keep that in your mind as we're going through the program, so that when it comes to your dissertation topic, you firstly know what area you'd like to work on, and secondly, when we encounter theories across the module, you can see, ah yeah, that's how that relates to that concept that I'm interested in, or that outcome that I'm interested in. And that will make the process of writing up a dissertation so much easier if you're doing something that you're passionate about. And if you've been thinking about this throughout the year, you will have done much of the heavy lifting. When it comes to the dissertation period, you can just go ahead and get started in data collection. So I've already sort of outlined the benefits of the course. What we're looking to do here is to give people theory and methods that they can apply to promote good quality decisions in policy making or in business settings, and to understand the sort of problems that institutions face in those settings. So the benefits that you'll experience, particularly in coming to Stirling to learn these, is that we have the only behavioural science centre in Scotland. But what's unique in the UK, and I think more generally in Europe, about that behavioural science centre is that it brings together different disciplines. So I've mentioned that we have Craig, who's at the cutting edge of the application of behavioural economics to human resources. We have Simon, who's a psychologist. I myself am an economist, so is Stata. And so you're going to be getting really rich expertise from a variety of different backgrounds on this programme. The profile in the class, we have a nice number of students in terms of getting class group discussions going, but also being small enough that generally we find students create their own little community over the course of the year. And we've had great experience with students giving each other support and forming study groups and reviewing each other's surveys and experiments. And so there's a very nice community atmosphere by having 12 to 18 students. And again, we got a nice mix in terms of who those students are. There's roughly evenly split between people who come straight from undergrad and people who are coming to the course with work experience. We have a nice international spread of students, and we facilitate interaction between all of our students by organising social events over the course of the year. So when you come at the beginning of September, on the Friday of week 2, we're going to have a workshop for the full day where we'll have guest speakers in, and that will sort of give you a sense of the cutting edge research that's going on in behavioural science, as well as giving a sort of social outlet that we'll go out that evening and we'll get to know each other better. The sort of things that our previous students have gone on to do, a lot of them have gone on to very successful careers in the behavioural insights team in the UK, or what you might have heard of as the nudge unit. And some are going on to set up similar units in other countries. So Carl there is an Irish student who's gone to set up the behavioural science wing of Sustainable Energy Ireland. Ilaria has taken her behavioural science knowledge to work for the UN Food Programme. So applying these ideas in a domain that you mightn't necessarily associate with behavioural science, but of course rationing food is a really important job, and understanding how to go about doing that in a way that leads to the best outcomes is of vital importance. So that's really important work. We have Mauro, who started the Behavioural Science Community Scotland, which I've invited you to join. So that's a meetup group, and going along to those discussion groups is a really nice informal setting to get more of chat around these issues and sort of to see what's going on in the wider world as to where these ideas can be applied. And then Ali is working with the enterprise office here at Stirling to set up her own business called Sonus, a HR consultancy specializing in well-being. So she's going into companies doing well-being interventions on the basis of the sort of things that she had learned in the Psychology of Work module, and trying to make real change in organizations to promote the well-being of workers. And a nice feature of Ali's situation is that you can recognize from this that within the university, there's excellent support for students who have entrepreneurial ambitions and ideas. And so she's really profited from that over the past year or so to build up what was an idea into something that's scalable and is now a successful business. I've already given you a sense there of the sort of career opportunities that are open to people. Obviously, another one that I didn't mention is academia. We've got 4 students who've gone on to PhDs elsewhere. And then the financial services industry is another big employer. So we have students who've gone on to Prudential, the pensions provider. We have students who've gone into the insurance industry. And so really it's a broad spread of students. One thing that we've discovered over the past couple of years is that our students haven't gone into the finance sector in the numbers that we would have thought there's a market for. So finance is an area where there's a lot of rich data. So we know from analyzing that data that behavioral science can leverage some, let me start with that again. We know from looking at the data that's available from the financial services sector that there's a lot of biases at play in financial decisions that are being made, not just by naive consumers. So certainly you're probably familiar with the pension sector as being a domain where behavioral science really has done a lot of impact, but also at the level of professional brokers. There's a lot of biases in terms of overconfidence, people trading more often than is profit maximizing, people holding on to losing stocks. And we would have expected that given the value that behavioral science can play in that sector, more of our graduates would have gone into it. And what we believe is going on there is that the finance world requires specialist language and knowledge in order to get people, firstly, reading the finance literature and also making a strong case in a job interview that they have something to offer in that domain. And so to cover that base, we've launched a new program, which is the Behavioral Decision Making for Finance program. And this is a really exciting one because it harnesses our accounting and finance division's expertise in financial analysis and matches that with our own expertise in behavioral science. So what you'll see is that there's some overlap in the modules that are offered on this program with what we've just seen for the Behavioral Science for Management program, but there's also more of a grounding in core finance principles. So in semester 1, you'll get a grounding in corporate finance, how to go about reading an accounts ledger. Quantitative methods in finance is a quantitative skills course that's directed more at financial applications than the equivalent course in the Behavioral Science for Management program. In semester 2, you'll also be doing evidence-based decision making, just like the Behavioral Science for Management students. But in addition, you'll have specialist courses in finance. So you'll have a module specifically in behavioral finance, which is going to show you these applications of behavioral decision making and the biases that occur in the financial sector. Empirical methods in finance and accounting is a statistics module that's going to show you examples of how to go about applying the sort of quantitative skills that you've learned in semester 1 to the sort of publicly available data that you can get in the finance world. And then you have an optional module, so you can choose from fixed income investments, equities, mergers and acquisitions, or international corporate finance. And each of those domains has a lot of behavioral things going on. And so any one of those is going to be a rich vein. So really, you can't go wrong with any that you pick there, but it's a matter of which you're most interested in. And so at this stage, it's a good idea to be thinking, where would you like to go with this qualification? And to start thinking about which of those programs you're going to choose when the time comes. The dissertation for the Behavioural Decision Making for Finance program is slightly different in its emphasis than is the one for the Behavioural Science for Management program, insofar as what we're looking to get from students here is that we want to equip students with a portfolio that they can bring into a job interview, demonstrating to a firm, here's how I can make you attractive to your customers, or how I can help you save money by avoiding biased decisions by your brokers. So it's really designed to be a sort of a portfolio that you can demonstrate the value that you can add to a finance firm. So we're asking you to write up a prospectus for a behaviorally informed commercial product that you might be able to offer if you were to go into the investment space. That's one model that we see as being the sort of default for this. There's a second model, which again is similar to the Behavioural Science for Management program. It may be that over the course of the program, you uncover a new theory or some amendment to an existing theory around decision-making for finance. And if that's the case, we'd be very keen to work with you to develop that theory and to write it up in the form of an academic paper. So that would be a more conventional sort of dissertation, and that option is open to you. So as I say, one of the benefits of this course is that it's going to equip you with this toolkit from the Accounting and Finance division. You'll get this really core training in finance, but with this added knowledge of behavioral science and psychological biases, and also a toolkit with which to test for those using existing data sources. And that will give you critical skills to assess the financial world. So whether it's investment strategies in a brokerage firm, or perhaps as a regulator working for the Financial Conduct Authority, spotting where it is that firms are abusing their customers, you're going to be of value given that combination of skills. And we appreciate that this is a domain that's likely to grow in demand over the next couple of years, because we live in an age of more and more big data. And so being able to analyze a big data set and using that data set to identify biases in decision making is going to be of huge value to firms, to investment brokerages, and as I say, to regulators. How can we go about closing up those loopholes and protecting consumers from parasitic firms? In the Behavioural Decision Making for Finance course, you'll also be offered this Amplify Trading Bootcamp. And that's a week-long course in which you'll effectively learn to be a trader. It's like operating on the trading floor. The Finance and Accounting division here has a wealth of big data sets available to it that you'll have access to. It has a trading terminal that you'll be able to access in real time. And so this Amplify Trading Bootcamp is going to give you that opportunity. So you can test out your theories in practice, see how you perform relative to the market and relative to other trading strategies, and see if you can create value. So I think given the two courses, a useful summary slide for this is to highlight what are the differences between the Behavioural Science for Management program and the Behavioural Decision Making for Management program, Behavioural Decision Making for Finance program. And clearly there are overlaps in terms of both giving you an understanding of psychological biases and the motivations that people have. But I think the Behavioural Science for Management program gives you a broader overview of the state of knowledge in the discipline of behavioral science, which is a very new discipline, but it's one that's expanding all the time, and its reach is extending into areas as diverse as law and ethics, healthcare, nutrition, environmental policy. So that behavioral science for management's program is designed to be much broader and all-encompassing. The behavioral decision-making for finance program will also give you that literacy in how to understand research and behavioral science generally, but it's going to be much more targeted to give in-depth insights for the financial sector. And that's reflected in the teaching of the programs. So in the behavioral decision-making for finance program, you're going to learn quantitative techniques that are applied specifically to the financial sector. You'll learn terminology specific to the financial sector, and you'll learn how to evaluate financial products and portfolios through things like price-earnings ratios and market beta, and things that the more general behavioral science for management students may not consider the best use of their time. So we target according to people's needs on that basis. As I pointed out, there's a slightly different emphasis in the focus of the research projects that you'll do, the dissertations for each of these two programs, where the behavioral science for management program takes a more expansive view, and you can really apply behavioral science to whatever outcome you're interested in. The behavioral decision-making for finance program, we'd expect that you're trying to put together something that makes you attractive to a particular area in the financial sector. And so we're going to work with you to design a dissertation outcome that gets you to that point. And then we have these sort of ancillary activities that differ across the two programs. So as I said, the behavioral science program, we'll have a workshop in week 1 to sort of introduce the students to the program. And the behavioral decision making for finance students are also invited to attend that, and we'd love you to attend in order that there's a good social mixing across the groups. But you'll see that the emphasis of that program, that first workshop, is on where psychology meets behavioral science. And so it's less applied to the financial sector, but more of a sort of broad overview of what underpins behavioral science. So generally the sort of workshops and seminars that we have will have that broad take on things that might be of more interest to the behavioral science for management students. The flip side is that the behavioral decision making for finance students get this in-depth hands-on time with trading through the form of the Amplify trading bootcamp. We also have a student managed investment fund here at Stirling that students can get their hands dirty with, and we're trading real money in that case. And so that's an exciting one where students can take on the role of trader and see how they perform relative to the market. And it's a testing ground again for your investment decision making. So that is a summary of the two programs. And at this point, I invite you to ask any questions that you might have. So I'll hand over to you. Thanks for your time. So there's a question here from Ryan asking about the behavioral decision making for finance course. And he's asking, can we give an idea of how much taught time there is each week on the program? And this, specifically in the context of juggling the course with childcare. So at this stage, Ryan, I could give you an answer in terms of the number of contact hours that you're likely to have a week. So that would be with 3 modules in the first semester, you'll likely have 3 hours for each of those modules. That's what you'd expect in an average week, 2 hours of lecture and 1 of seminars. And so that would amount to 9 hours of contact time or thereabouts on average per week. In terms of juggling that with childcare, how those hours are spread across the week is something that won't be known until the timetable is finalized. And so once that timetable is finalized, we'll make sure to get it out to you all as soon as possible so that you have a sense of what you can expect in any given week and plan your life around that. Then we have a question from Krishna Treya. So, behavioral science for management, the level of support provided by the university for the dissertation. So, industry contacts or references for conducting primary research. And that's especially in the context of being an international student who doesn't have those contacts in the UK. So one thing that I can say on this generally is that our model for dissertations in the past has not required people to work with industry or work with any partners in order to gather data or to conduct their dissertation. So typically what students have done for their dissertations is they have come up with a survey design or an experimental design and disseminated that either in face-to-face contexts, like going to a train station and handing out pen and paper surveys, or else they've sent it out through web portals in order to get up respondent numbers. And in that context, there isn't really any support needed except for a supervisor who will read over the thing and make sure that it makes sense. And so, of course, each student for their dissertation is going to have a supervisor to do that. And the supervisor is not alone in giving you that support. We'll start preparing for dissertation towards the end of the first semester, and then we'll have a couple of meetings in the second semester at which students present their dissertation ideas. So you'll be getting feedback from the class and from the faculty on the program about your dissertation idea at that stage. One thing that we're working on increasingly is that students can have some real-world applications of their dissertation idea. And so we encourage students to make contact with firms themselves that when they have an idea that they think might be applied, to make the pitch, show how you can add value, how your idea is of use to that firm, and see if you can collaborate with them. And we've had success through student initiatives with this in the past. So, for example, 2 years ago, our prize-winning dissertation student, Bob, went to the public bike scheme in Stirling and suggested that a social norms poster might be more effective than their current advertising campaign in terms of recruiting people to join the public bike scheme. So there was a case where the student spotted an opportunity, took the initiative, went to the firm that he thought would profit from this and made his case. And it worked out insofar as they were persuaded, and he collected data with them and is now working in that space. And so we're very keen to encourage that, but it's really up to you to make the most of your time here at Stirling to make those contacts. Now, that said, we do have an employment office here at the management school that's very active in terms of trying to facilitate these links. And so in the course of next semester, when we're talking about dissertations, we'll show you some dissertation titles that local firms have come to the management school looking for support from students to help them to understand some business questions that they have. And one thing that is important to note about behavioral science is that it's a very recent discipline. And so often firms can't express their questions in a way, often firms don't know that behavioral science exists. And because they don't know that behavioral science exists, they don't express their questions in a way that seems targeted towards a behavioral science answer. And I'm not saying that as a complaint, I'm saying it as something that you need to be aware of, that one of the things that you're going to have to learn over the course of the program is how to communicate that you can add value, how to make that case that you have a toolkit that your firm is unlikely to spontaneously recognize that they have a use for. And so we will have opportunities to see the sort of questions that are out there from small businesses around Stirling, and also from the Scottish Government Service, who also provide us with a list of dissertations. And it's going to be up to us to sort of massage the questions that were asked into ones that we, as researchers in behavioural science, are able to answer. And then we can go back to those firms and to the government service and suggest, well, here's how we could address, at least in part, the question that you're asking, and then we can continue that dialogue. And so, in answer to your question, particularly for overseas students who may not have links coming to Scotland, it's going to be part of your experience here over the year at Stirling to try to find opportunities to develop those links. And there are resources here at the university that can help you do that. The Employment Office, the Employability Manager here at the Management School, and then student societies are also a rich way of doing it. But just keeping a network going with people, talking to people, striking up conversations, really that's the most reliable way of doing this. So Andreas has 3 quick questions. Okay. So firstly, Andreas, you will, as a behavioral decision making for finance student, be able to attend the workshops and seminars that are offered for the Behavioural Science for Management course. Timetable permitting, we welcome everyone coming along to these. Your second question is that you saw in job postings from the Behavioural Insights team that employers ask applicants to have experience in handling data sets, working with databases and knowledge of statistical programs, for example, SPSS and Stata. Will you be taught these? The answer to that is yes. We're very keen that students are adept at using software to answer research questions, and both SPSS and Stata are programs that we'll teach you to use over the course of the module. So understanding and using statistics will teach you a grounding in those. Then that will be supplemented in the second semester in the survey measurement and analysis module. And then your third question is that last year 2 electives were taught in semester 1 and the other 2 were in the second semester. Will that be the case this year too? I think there is a confusion there, Andreas, because the behavioural decision making for finance program didn't run, it wasn't offered last year. This is the first year that it's been offered. So perhaps you're looking at the MSc in finance program, but in any case, I can clarify that for this coming year, there will be no electives in semester 1 for the behavioural decision making for finance program, but there will be an elective that you need to choose for semester 2. And you'll see on the slides there the 4 options that there are available for that. Carolyn asks, what are the expectations for students to remain in Stirling during semester 3 working on their dissertation? So there is an expectation certainly that students will keep in contact with their supervisor during the 3rd semester. And we understand that people have obligations at home if they're international students. And so we certainly wouldn't expect students to be physically in Stirling if they have things that they need to be getting on with elsewhere. And that would include things like doing job interviews. So we can work with students to accommodate how they want to spend that 3rd semester. There aren't any formal scheduled teaching times in that 3rd semester where you're working on the dissertation. So it's something that you can work out with your supervisor, and supervisors are very accommodating on that. And I can say, as a supervisor of 3 dissertations myself right now, that I'm also off attending conferences and have other commitments that mean that I'm not always around the university. So it's a matter of working out with students how it best fits both of us. So there are guidelines on that supervision relationship. it's your research project, and so it's up to you to take the lead on and take the final decisions on what exactly it's going to look like. Your supervisor will guide you through that process, and generally what you can expect over those summer months is that you'll have 3 face-to-face meetings or extended Skype meetings with your supervisor, in which usually it's the case the first of those meetings will bed down what exactly is the research question that you're asking and how are you going about answering it. Then once the data is coming in, making sure that everything is running smoothly with the data collection process and that you're getting what you want from it so that we can troubleshoot at that stage. And then the last one tends to be at the point of where there's a first draft, a sort of discussion around how to communicate the ideas most clearly at that stage. So there's a student returning to study from the labour market, and he's asking, are there any refresher courses that the uni run that might help with some of the academic basics that people have forgotten? For example, how to reference properly in essays. And I'm glad you asked that, because that's precisely the sort of thing that the Flying Start program that we run here at the Management School is intended to offer. So this is sort of understanding the academic way of life, not just for people who've been out of the university setting for a long time, but also because we have a mix of different cultures at Stirling Management School, sort of giving a sense of what are the norms here at Stirling Management School. So that will cover things like referencing and even how to go about reading a paper most effectively. Okay, it seems now that we've got all those questions. So if you think of any more questions over the course of the next while, feel free to email me and I'll be able to send my answers along to you. Thanks for your time, and it was good to talk to you today. Bye-bye now.